Reddit, what things have you overheard that have broken your heart? I was at the local casino around 15 years ago and they were dragging a woman out for causing a disturbance. She was yelling, "He is spending our rent money." Apparently, he was at the table and wouldn't stop playing and she was trying to interrupt it. Made me super sad. I live in Oklahoma, where the only place you can purchase alcohol besides Low Point beer is in a licensed, dedicated liquor store, which can only be open at certain times of day. Anyway, I'm heading to the one by my house to get a bottle of scotch. I'm walking in, when I hear a little boy crying, "Mommy, you can't go in there. You don't need liquor." His mom replies, "Yes, I do. Now shut up and wait in the car." I haven't been able to think of much else since then. I overheard a maintenance worker in my apartment arguing with his drunk wife one night. Her son, his stepson, about 5 years old, yelled, "I hate you, you're not my dad." Pretty sure the guy started crying afterward. He's such a nice guy too. Someone replied, "My little brother is adopted." And we told him, so he knew. One shitty teenage day, he was like, "I don't care, it's not like you're my real parents anyway." I think they were fighting because he was grounded and he wanted to go to a friend's party anyway. He never said it again and still feels guilty about it. My point being, even though he's 5, the kid probably will realize he overstepped a boundary, unless he's just a little shit. In line at Taco Bell, I was irritated at how long this woman and her kid were taking, until I found out what was going on. She was counting fucking pennies. The kid said, "It's okay, Mom, we don't need the food items," and I swear to God I thought I was on the set of a live Charles Dickens story. You could see they didn't have much, the mom looked malnourished, and both were skinny. I went up to the counter and said, "No, how much is it? It's a holiday gift from your neighbor." The lady tried to refuse but I said no, this wasn't some huge charity on my part. Not trying to get karma for that, it was only like $3 or $4 more bucks. I paid the amount more that she needed and she thanked me. It didn't make me feel much better, all I could think about what are they going to do for fucking breakfast? A friend of mine got drunk at a barbecue, kids and husband were there too. When it was explained to her that someone would drive her home, she went ballistic. I hurried her kids into my car, didn't have keys, just didn't want them to hear the cursing, ranting awfulness spewing from their mother. Her oldest son asked me what was wrong with her, and I explained, "Mommy just drank too much bad stuff and it has made her sick. She's just sick right now, but she will feel better later." He said, "Oh, she's drunk again." I felt so horrible. Her youngest was crying, and she kept asking me, "How much longer until Mommy feels better?" I didn't know what to say. I hated everything about that night. Someone replied, "This just brought back a terrible memory. My dad was a bad alcoholic, real bad. Needless to say, the weekends he came to pick us up were always interesting. This time he took us, 2 girls, about 7 and 10, to a barbecue in a park and got so drunk he fell, hit his head on the corner of a brick barbecue and passed out. We knew no one there. They were probably all drunk. I remember thinking that he was gonna die. He got sober when I was 12 and died when I was 25. He was an awesome dad for those 13 years. My daughter is just over 1 year old and we send her to an in-home daycare during the week, while we're at work. There is another little girl in daycare with her who has a physical handicap having to do with her legs. Her parents drop her off with a wheelchair and leg braces for assisted walking. She's an adorable little girl, always happy, and during normal playtime hours at daycare, she gets around by doing a mix of crawling and pulling herself around the room on the floor. One morning, a few weeks ago, I dropped my daughter off and I was talking to the woman who runs the daycare about how my daughter was starting to walk. The other little girl overheard me and she immediately turned and said, "No, I want Lily to stay on the floor with me." Broke my heart, sad face. I saw a little girl order something off a menu at a restaurant in Florida. When she was done ordering, her mom said, "You messed up again. I trusted you this time. You want to get that tummy tuck surgery when you're 20? What's the matter with you? Waiter. Give us a few more minutes." My daughter was confused. The little girl was not that overweight. Had to be around 10 years old. And was now crying hysterically. The mother kept yelling at her to stop embarrassing her and making a scene. I'm a dude, was about 22 at the time, and considered the consequences of smacking her in the face. Not exactly overheard, but last week I was chilling out at a buddy's house. At around midnight a bunch of cop cars and an ambulance show up at his neighbor's house. We notice the cops are talking to the little boy who lives there. We know the boy pretty well, he is a good friend of my buddy's son. We're going to call him Martin, and he is about 7. After the police leave, Martin is sitting outside and we call him over to see if everything is okay. Martin's grandpa lives with him, so we assumed something happened to him, because of the ambulance. But, as soon as we say, "Hey Martin, what was going on there?" he instantly yells, "Nobody hit me. My daddy doesn't hit me." It made us so sad. Somebody replied, "That's really sad. I used to do social work with kids who have been abused and neglected. Parents will threaten their kids, they tell them people will take them away to a bad place/a stranger's house if they tell anybody about being hit/beaten. They warn them not to talk to anyone about it, including teachers and child protective services. Very sad. I don't know about immediately heartbreaking, but a woman came into the pawn shop where I work. She was a regular for around 3 years. She hadn't been back in a few weeks, so I was surprised when I saw her, but she needed a very large loan. Turns out she had hired a babysitter so that she could go downtown with her friends, and she didn't trust the sitter, so she took the cash that she had in her drawer for rent/bills/food for her 2 small children in case the sitter went looking through her stuff. At first, I thought it was a silly thing to do, let alone having that much cash on you, but I'm used to these people not having bank accounts. Turns out it was an excuse. She took the money downtown and gambled away every last cent on VLT machines. She laughed about it. I told her that it was very serious, and she laughed it off and said, "Yeah, it's kind of an addiction, but what are you going to do?" The worst part was when she tried to tell me that I was responsible for her children's empty stomachs when I wouldn't give her the loan amount she wanted. I see this kind of stuff so often, my job depresses me so much. About a year ago I was waiting for a train and there was a bit of commotion around the train station. A police car was parked on one side and someone was talking about how there was a girl on the tracks. When I was going up the stairs to get to my train, 2 police officers were dragging a girl that looked to be about 15, right past me. The way she cried was almost inhuman, not so much crying as screaming incoherently. She was dressed in a bright pink jacket, and one of the officers tried to make some small talk, to make her calm down. I heard him something along the lines of, "What a nice jacket you have." She stopped screaming and crying just enough to reply. Her answer still haunts me today. I wanted my parents to know who it was. My mom runs the after-school program at her school for 3 to 6-year-olds. There was a mom of a 3-year-old little boy who always came to pick him up at 5:59 p.m., 1 minute before aftercare ends, and she would ignore him completely, stare at her phone, and then bark orders at him if he wasn't moving quick enough. One day he made some coloring or artwork thing and wanted to show it to her. She snatched it out of his hands, crumpled up the paper, and said, "Do you think I need to be bothered with this right now?" My mom ended up talking to the principal and having the school social worker meet with the mom about appropriate behavior on school property, but I still want to clock that lady. Walking by a child and what looks like an older sister/aunt or whatever with my Spider-Man shirt. Kid, cool, I love Spider-Man. Me, awesome, me too. I continue walking but a little off in the distance. Older sister, why do you like him so much? Kid, I pretend that he's my dad and we beat up bad guys instead of beating up mommy. I was walking home from the store, didn't have a car at the time, about 5 years ago. This little boy who was probably around 4 or 5 and his mother were walking hand in hand somewhere, presumably to the park that was nearby. They aren't saying much, just talking about the trees and gardens outside people's houses. Things get quiet for a moment and then the kid drops a bomb. "Mommy, why did Daddy die?" He didn't say it in a sad tone but was almost curious. The woman gets this really dejected look on her face, starts to cry and she sort of picks up speed. It wasn't that she was deliberately trying to ignore his question, I just think she didn't have the words to explain to him. I thought about it for the rest of the way home. Gave my dad a hug that night. I used to live in a pretty messed up place and next door lived a large family, grandma and grandpa, 3 sons. Also, the wife and son of the eldest son lived there as well. This kid was my best friend. I'm 27 and today he is still like a brother to me. Every single day I could hear awful fights in there. Stuff breaking, doors smashing, fights, you name it. Almost every day we would call the cops. One time I even heard a large fight taking place on the building stairs followed by the worst agonizing scream. The middle son had stabbed his own father in the gut 3 times. His father survived. Months later the son returned and his father let him in. At this point, I should mention that every single son, and also the wife, were seriously hardcore heroin abusers. Now that's not even the most messed up thing. To this day it still breaks my heart when I think about what I'm about to write. It was about 3 a.m. and I heard the unmistakable sound of yet another fight. Yet, this one seemed different. I could hear my best friend, we were like 9 at the time, crying. He usually hid in his room and I never heard him during these fights. I rushed to the door and looked through the peephole. It appears Grandpa was kicking all his sons out of the house. The 2 younger ones left semi-peacefully just screaming your ordinary threats like, "I'll be back," and shit. But, believe it or not, Grandpa was always a decent dude. He was grabbing his grandson, and almost begging his older son and wife, "Please let him stay here and have a normal life away from all of you." I stood there in horror. My best friend was being pulled by both arms, one his grandpa, the other his scumbag of a father. Eventually, the son's wife punched Grandpa in the face and Grandpa let go of the arm. His father was, literally, dragging my best friend down the stairs. All I could hear was, "Please Dad, let me take at least one of my toys. Please Dad." The more he screamed, the more his dad would hit him. And I mean, hit him. I could hear it. At this point, my parents were already up and had called the cops and tried to intercept this scumbag. They screamed at him to let the kid go, but the douchebag just pulled out a knife on my parents, got in the car and drove off. Years have passed and I can still see my friend's face, tears running down his face screaming, "Please, just one of my toys Dad." He now lives a healthy life and never touched drugs. He's a freelance photographer who does stuff like weddings and such. He cut all ties with his family except for his grandma. His grandpa passed away when we were like 16. Both his parents are still junkies that are in and out of jail. Edit. I should mention that his father brought him back to his grandparents a couple of days later. If it was because he had a last drop of human decency or he just realized he didn't care, I have no idea. He lived with his grandparents until he was old enough to leave and start a life. Subscribe so you don't miss the next videos.